Okay, I'm going to do a bit of a hack for this one. Okay, um, just because you should be able to see this relationship, and since you're doing these as multiple choice, I'll come back and I'll add to this later if I want to show all the math behind it. But right now, I'm just gonna here's the hack. Um, Look at this small triangle here. Okay, this side of 30 is the hypotenuse. That's the hypotenuse. How do I know that? Because you get right angles being formed down here by this altitude that's dropped, this altitude, right? So this blue side, that's the hypotenuse. That's the longest side of this triangle. So if A says, how far is the spot on the beach from the parking lot? Parking lot to beach, this length right here, that's what they're asking for. Well, look at what their choices are. For B, it says 38. It can't be longer than the hypotenuse. That's one of the legs, and it is definitely shorter than that. So right away, I can say, well, that can't be the case. Um, Same way, C says 34. Nope, can't be. That side, that purple side, cannot be longer than what the hypotenuse of that triangle is. The hypotenuse is, by definition, the longest side. It's across from the biggest angle, so it's going to be the longest side. Okay, and let's follow a little bit more of the kind of logic of elimination of these problems now. Okay, so it appears from the remaining answers that that distance is 24, but what's it asking about for B? It says how far is his place on the beach from the refreshment stand, and that's this length here. Well, if we oriented these triangles correctly, and let me just erase this stuff right here. If we oriented these triangles correctly, you would see that that side is the longer of the two legs. Okay, that corresponds to the altitude here. Okay, so that the longer of the two legs on the small triangle is to this dark blue one. The longer of the two legs on the bigger or the medium-sized triangle. I guess the biggest triangle is all of it. Okay, so what? Well, we know that if this is a length of 24, and that, see how the remaining answers say that's going to be a length of 24 meters? Okay. We know because this is the smaller triangle, and we know it's a smaller triangle because you look at the hypotenuse of this is 30, whereas this is 40, and they're similar. Okay. So they're going to have a scale factor, correct scale factor of that side to that side, and now that we say, well, we know that side if it's the only remaining choice, then we know that 24 is to some longer side than that. Okay, on the bigger triangle, that side has to be longer than it is on this. Here it's 24. What's it going to be on here? Well, it's not going to be less than 24. And D has an answer that's less than that length. That pink length from the parking lot to the beach. Oops. That's shorter than this length here from the beach to the refreshment stand. And hopefully you can see the logic of why it's shorter. So it's longer, and this side's shorter. So this side has to be a bigger number than 24, and so it can't be D. And so we're going to choose A as our answer. Okay, so here we have Kristen living directly east of the park, and the football field is directly south of the park. So her home, you can see her home here, directly east. Directly south is football field. The library sits on the line formed between Kristen's home and the football field at the exact point where an altitude to the right angle formed by her home, the park, and the football field could be drawn. Okay, so the library is right there at that intersection where that altitude would meet this length between her home and the football field. Okay, that's all sketched out. You can see it. The library is 2 miles from her home. The football field is 8 miles from her home. So the first question is how far is the library from the park? What's this? Well, we're finding the altitude. So how do we do that? We do each of these small sections. we do this times this, and then square root it, and we will get the altitude that. So we could say the altitude, and let's label it as A here. The altitude A is equal to the square root of those two numbers multiplied together. 8 times 2. And what do you get for 8 times 2? 8 times 2 we know is 16, so the square root of 16. A is 4. So again, just like before, we're eliminating any ones that already don't have the correct answer for the first part. There it is. Okay. And now how far is the park from the football field? And the park from the football field is this length over here in blue. Park to football field. And how do we find that? We take the entire length of the distance where she is going from her home to the football field, this entire length, times whatever this side is that corresponds with the edge of the triangle that you're trying to get. Okay, so since we're looking for this side, we want that segment times the whole thing. So now we can call that blue distance, let's say B. And okay, let's do it. So we can say then B equals the square root of the whole length, and we knew that it was, we need to erase to see that number, 8. So 8 plus the 2 gives you a whole blue section of 10 times that pink section of 8. And so we get B equals square root of 80. B equals, and if we could break this apart, I could do the prime factorization of this. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, and 16 times 5 is 80. So I have a pair of 2's, another pair of 2's, and we get B equals 2 times 2 comes out, 4 root 5. That's for B. So you can see that it's not D, that has 3 root 2, and A has 4 root 5. A is out.